webinar that you keep your speaker muted. We're going to be using the chat function and the Q&A for posting any questions or any observations. If you raise your hand, we won't be recognizing that today, but we will recognize anything posted in chat and Q&A. But please keep yourself muted for this really special presentation by Shore Deni today. So we're going to begin with our traditional land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this webinar is being hosted in a region in California that is the unceded territorial home to multiple tribal nations. As we begin this meeting, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our region. We believe a land acknowledgement like this is a critical first step toward working with Native communities to create and nurture meaningful partnerships and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and homelands. I ask that we take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds on which we collectively are gathered, and that we endeavor to support the resilience and strength of all Indigenous peoples. I currently am speaking to you as a guest in Oceanside, California on traditional unceded Luiseño Payamquechan land. So let's just take a moment. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome again to everyone. And I hope some other folks have joined us. On the agenda that we sent out, we like to do a sampling of March awareness, or monthly awareness points of interest. And this is a very, very, very important month, the month of March. It's Women's History Month, among other things. But I was just saying to Shore and Marilyn earlier when we gathered that, there's an old saying that women hold up or support half the sky. In my life, and I've lived a long, good life thus far, the women in my life have really held up at least 90% of the sky. So I hope we all can take time to appreciate the women in our lives and this very special month this year. So thank you. I'm going to take a minute to go over the rules of what I call comportment for this webinar. Again, I ask that everyone remain muted for this particular session, and any hands that you raised, unfortunately, will not be able to recognize them. And if you have questions, and there'll be several opportunities during the presentation by Shore Deni to address questions and take questions, please put those into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be facilitating those and sharing those with Shore. So hopefully she'll have an opportunity to address all of your questions. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available on the Alliance for Regional Solutions Racial Justice Committee website. So the full thing is being recorded. And in the background, Blaine and Marilyn and I will be facilitating. So I'm delighted today to introduce Shore Deni. Shore is a member of our Racial Justice Committee, and she's the founder and CEO of Community Now, a nonprofit organization formed a decade ago to focus on violence reduction and mental wellness programming for service community members. Shore draws on her extensive experience and her master's degree in mental health and wellness to create, implement, and advocate for trauma-informed coping strategies, community prevention campaigns, and mental wellness programming. Ms. Deni provides trauma-informed coaching and training throughout our region and beyond. So if any of you would like to hear more from Shore Deni and partake of her experiences and her talents, we encourage you to follow up with her directly later, and we can provide you with her email address. But she does provide extensive coaching and training from a trauma-informed perspective throughout San Diego County, into Riverside County, and beyond. So without further ado, I would like to turn this over to Shore Deni. And Shore, I'm really excited about today, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited, you guys, and we have a lot of information, so I am really just going to jump right into it. I will be introducing myself a little bit as we go. Get my presentation together. I'm so excited, you guys. We really do need to talk. There are going to be discussion moments. Please, please give information, put your thoughts into the chat. This is one of the first times we're going to be able to talk about these kind of things in this kind of a forum. I am really just excited. So to get started, I'm talking about our history in America and how we're going to break down the lie. And like Rafe said, I'm sure, Denny, I have a master's in psychology, and I found that our race relations have a lot to do with our mental wellness, and that's why this all came together. This is a safe space, and I want you to feel comfortable to, with respect, interact with us, right? Let's all be adults and let's all try to get these questions that we've always wanted to know out, but let's try to do it, in a respectful way. We will be discussing things you just have not discussed, maybe concepts you haven't thought about. And again, let's just be honest and respectful with each other as we go through this. There are 2 parts. This is part number 1. I would usually do a breathing because, a lot of the clients that I work with, this is very stressful information. And I start with the breathing, but I believe that I think Rafe did great with the land acknowledgement. And again, we need time. So breathe, you guys. Take 1 second right now. I want you to know that 988, all of us are going through things and all of us are having these stressors. So write down the number 988 if you need support in any way, not just crisis, not suicide, but resources and things that you need, ideas, ways to get out of what you're in. Contact 988 and they will help find a way to support you. All right, let's get to the meat of this. What our reference material is, it's not something that this whole presentation is written off of, but I found that a lot of what I'm talking about is in this book. So I make this a must read, right? The history, the people's history of the United States. So take a print screen, write it down if you want to go deeper into a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about. Why slavery, you guys? I know we know that slavery has existed since city-states, right? Chiefdoms, since tribes. Anytime that a person was able to get somebody else to do something for them for free, there was probably a form of slavery, the seed was being placed. But all of us can come together in our history here in America and think about the Egyptians, right? When we think about the Christian information that has been passed down to us, and we can kind of relate to slavery through the Egyptians and the Jews that were, there, and all of the strife that went on when the pyramids were being built. So think of civilization building, right? When we're thinking about slavery, think of big, huge projects. And with that, you're going to need low-cost labor. This makes sense, right? Big projects, low-cost labor. So for a slave, the cost would be food, right? Maybe not even that, depending on how long you wanted to keep the slave, would be how much you invested into that person. So one of the things that happened was there was a search for labor. So anybody here, I want to stop and Blaine, if you can help me, does anybody know why slavery started? It's one big word, but does anybody know it? Can anybody throw that word out right now? Why did slavery start? There's some hints in the slide. No? Sugar. Let's take a moment. Sugar. Let's think about your relationship with sugar. How do you feel about sugar? And then we're going to move on, right? Because sugar, what is in your drink right now? Do you have a drink? Is there sugar in it? Raise your hand. Is there sugar? Most usually, unless Rafe got me. No, I'm not talking about the water drinkers, but almost everything that we have has sugar in it. Everything that we eat has some type of a sugar in it. So think of that, keep that in your mind, sugar. So before all of this started happening, sugar was being produced, right? It was being produced well before slavery, but it wasn't being produced in mass. And a lot of people didn't know about it. So think of your diet before sugar. What were you eating? What could we have possibly been eating without sugar? And wow, when sugar was found, how that really had to increase everybody's appetite and palate, right? So prior to African bondage, the sugar plantations were run in the Mediterranean, and this was run through the Silk Road, right? If anybody knows about Silk Road and trades, everything came through the Silk Road, and sugar was running that way too. And it was a really small endeavor. And what we saw was that they were looking for the right person to work the sugarcane fields, because I have to tell you, after I had my first taste of sugar, I wanted more. So when you saw that you wanted more and you knew production had to begin, where was it going to be? So let's start talking about the climate that's needed for sugar. And sugar was a very laborious job. So it needed a lot of people. So you're thinking sugar as a demand and the need of where it's going to grow. So what we found was that Caucasian, European type of people, number one, the environment wasn't good for sugar, so you couldn't grow it there really. And then number two, where the environment was good for sugar in a real moist, humid climate, those European people didn't do very well. So there became this problem of, okay, we need to get this sugar, but where are we going to grow it and who is going to do it for us? And that's really kind of how all of this really began. So the Atlantic slave trade was actually about sugar and where and how we were going to get that sugar, right? So up until the 1400s, like I said, it was basically going through the Silk Road and through trade. But after the 1400s, that's when things started picking up. And that's when Spain started checking out, whoa, there's sugar out there. And just, the manufacturing of sugar started. You can look this history up. I'm going to go quickly through these slides, but it ended up in Brazil, y'all. Brazil is where everything actually started happening. So the big slave thing was sugar. Now, this is a quote, and I'm going to read just a little of it because I found this really, think of marketing today. Think of marketing today. And then you can think of like cocaine when cocaine was in Coke. Remember all of these fun things that we've had in our history. So here, white sugar. This is some great man. I can't even pronounce his name. Tabernaemonitanas from 1515 to 1590, right? But this is what he said: sugar, sugar, look at what it can do for you. It can heal almost every sickness. It's good for strengthening your mind and body. That you can smoke it, you can drink it, you can snort it. It's good for you, right? It helps bring vigor to old people, So this is kind of the marketing that was going on at the time about sugar and how great it would be. Now you can imagine that it was very expensive and not everybody had it in the beginning. But that's where the Portuguese came into effect, right? So the Portuguese ended up going into Brazil by mistake, and they said, what a great place to grow sugar. So they tried to take the indigenous people and make them slaves to do the sugar trade, but it didn't work. The indigenous people threw their thumb up to them and said, this is not going to happen here. We'd rather kill ourselves. Mass suicides and the diseases of the Europeans really just devastated the Brazilian indigenous people. I had a great opportunity to go to Brazil last year. I'm so excited. And this picture is from the African Museum in Brazil. And I put it here because I wanted you to understand that even Brazil, Portuguese, and Europe understands that if you look at the picture at the bottom, those are the slaves, right? Multicolored, but the slaves, and how the entire economy is built upon the back of the slave. I just found this very strong and a very good picture of what has happened. And not here. I'm talking about in Portugal. I'm talking about in Brazil. And I'm talking about before the slave trade of America. I thought it was important to know because a lot of people wonder why. Why was there slavery? Sugar, y'all. It was sugar. And where sugar could be planted and who would do the work. So I know you guys know, or I'm going to tell you right now that in 1492, Christopher Columbus did not discover America, but he did discover Haiti and other indigenous islands. And with those, And yeah, and in those islands, what with Haitian and particularly, they tried to put the Haitians into slavery, right? They tried to grow sugar right there, and they tried to make the indigenous people do the work. But what we find in history is that they again said no. The indigenous people refused. The Christopher Columbus and his people were so brutal that they would cut pieces of meat out of their slaves and feed it to their dogs. They played games with the indigenous people, killing them. They were so brutal. They didn't feed them and just let them die. So the indigenous people did mass suicides. They killed their children. They did what they needed to do so that they would not have to deal with the slavery of the Spaniard. And Christopher Columbus took many, many, many of them to Spain. But I will tell you that to this day, that in the Haitian population is African. I don't believe that there are any indigenous Haitian people still alive. They were eradicated during Christopher Columbus's time. So the enslavement of indigenous people, right? This has happened over and over all across the globe. And I just wanted to, again, point out that it happened up until and past the 18th century, and that it's something that's really not talked about, although it is very global. And in every instance, we'll find that the indigenous people were the first to be pulled into the labor force. So here's going to be a moment where I ask any discussion on, like, did you know it was sugar? Did you know that other people had sugar plantations other than us? Sugar?
No. Sure, some of the responses were money and economics, which is where I was leaning to, admittedly.
Yeah, yeah. Money and economics. And you could say it, and you could say it as money and economics, but it's just not that clean, is it? Because now we got to think about sugar. I'm sorry. I am a person that has taken sugary drinks out of my diet, but you know, it's something I have to do. I have to consciously go, I am not going to take the sugar. So can we imagine, can anybody here tell me what you eat? What can you think of your diet before sugar? And how huge an impact sugar had to have been. So yes, we're talking money, but we're also talking, I don't know, what would we call that? You know, the introduction of a whole thing into our food system that everybody wanted, you know, so that produced that trade. Any other questions or discussion?
Sure,
No, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Was someone else gonna? Oh, I had a thought as you were talking though too, that it was sugar, but it was also this level of brazenness and audacity by those enslaving other human beings that they. So there's like there's this like human element under it that's really ugly, I think. That's part, like, yes, it's maybe the sugar is like the physical element driving it, but it's also this presumption on behalf of the Europeans as a whole that somebody else should do this work for them. That I think is like a underlying current.
Right. And you know, you would have to look at I think they were under the feudal system. So if we think of the politics of the day, they wouldn't have done the work, right? The people that had the money to go and find the places certainly wouldn't have done the work. And what kind of workforce would they have had in Spain or England that would have been able to do the work over there? So, but what you're saying is exactly right, the presumption of it all.
Beyond that, Sherilyn also identified that it was just pure evil as well. You know, outside of the monetary motivation, it's just downright, you know, flat out evil.
So has anybody heard of 1619? That's not to answer this rhetorical. Anybody heard of 1619? That was when the White Lion, a Portuguese slave ship, came and touched the shores of Jamestown. And I bring the 1619 to our minds because sugar and the distribution of sugar started in the 1400s, right? So this is something that has been building where they are trying to find the right people, the right place. So just keep that in mind, you know, that this industry is behind the driver behind all of this. 1619, the Portuguese are already 200 years into their slave trade. And as they're doing that, something happened and their ship came to our shores. And the colonialists here were doing so bad and they needed all of the help that they could get. So they bartered for these 20 enslaved Africans to come and be indentured servants here in America. And in fact, these first 20 indentured servants, African, never became slaves. They stayed indentured servants. I'm not going to say that they got the same treatment and money as their fellow indentured servants, but they were not slaves. And does anybody know why? And I hate to throw up another rhetorical question. Does anybody know why? Can we throw out something really quick? Time's up. Because slavery didn't exist. Slavery hasn't existed yet. It didn't exist. Only system they had was indentured servitude, and that's what they put them in. But man, were they good workers. So another thing I wanted to talk about is why did hundreds of thousands of Europeans migrate to America? Right at that time, what was going on across the globe that made this happen? Did they just say, oh, America has a dream, you know, a new world and we want to go and conquer it? Well, no. What happened was a 30-year war over in Europe. Actually, it was one of the biggest religious wars in the continent. And what it did was change the power system to what it is today. So before this, it was different. So this war was a scorched or earth war. And as the enemies came across the lands, they burned and pillaged and raped to the point to where the land was not farmable. So you had hundreds of thousands of refugees that had no place to go, that were in abject poverty. And remember, the structure of the time was that you were lords and you owned land, you know, you had the king and queen, or you were the peasant, right? So now we're talking about a whole bunch of peasants over here who had no rights, no food, no industry. And along with that, they were treated like slaves in Europe. They had contracts that they had to get signed. They weren't allowed to marry without consent. All kinds of things were put upon them, and they were restricted in many, many ways. And you know, while I was looking at this, I always thought about the movie Roots. If you guys, that was like our first thing, Roots, and how horribly they treated the slave, right? How inhumane. And I wondered, is it just hate? Is it really just the color of their skin that made them treat these people this badly? And what I found out in my research was no, they actually treated themselves just as bad. So ancient European punishments were horrifying. They were very evil and mean and did horrifying things to themselves. So imagine if they could do this to themselves, what they would do to something or someone that they thought was so lowly as a slave. Now, while we're talking about the indentured servants, and this is a very unique picture over here where you're seeing Caucasian people working a cotton field and not African Americans. And that's because that's what they did. The indentured servants, they worked sugar, cotton, tobacco fields. They worked their 7 years, they did their time, right? And imagine, these are people that came from the devastation of Europe. Over here, they did this work, right? And they were promised land and they were promised money at the end of it. And they worked hard for that. So what we know is that the Caucasian person, and I'm calling them Europeans, Caucasian person that came over as indigenous servants, they simply weren't up to the task of the work that it took to do the plantation, farming. And they were really costly because they were going to get paid land and money. So does anyone have one thing that they didn't know in the prior sections that they'd like to throw out?
Not knowing how important a role that the sugar played was something that I didn't know. So that was very informative. One thing I did want to say, and I know that we're going to be moving on, is that I also went to Brazil. My grandfather was considered a Black Geechee. He always had a funny dialect, and I never knew why. And when my mom told me the story about the Portuguese and the slaves, you know, from Portugal, I became curious and interesting. So we'll talk about some of that offline, but it was very interesting and very moving. But the sugar was something, because I always thought cotton, you know, in terms of slave trade.
Yes, thank
Oh,
you.
this is
Well-
Joan Powell, real quick. I have a quick question. Have you been to Portugal? And if so, are you going to include this in your presentation?
Yes, I have been to Portugal. Yes, and I did include that one picture. I tried to make it important to focus in this one on America, but I did have to do that prehistory so that we understood why, you know, why everything came. But yes, ma'am, I could definitely do that.
Ivan put in there, he didn't realize it all started because of sugar. Thought it was, again, cotton and tobacco. And then one of the things that I was looking at was, I was familiar with some of the methods of torture, but there were some on that slide that you put up that I had never seen before. And they were kind of extra brutal too.
Right? I mean, who comes up with this? How did they, brutal-minded folks, you know, really? Really. So, okay, now the indentured servant, they did their time, right? 7 years of hard toil. They're getting their pay and they're going for their land, right? So civilization moves. And these people, they feel like they deserve it, right? They worked hard for it. But they started conflicting with other people in this land. And I wanted to highlight, because we're coming from the east going to the west, I wanted to highlight a tribe called the Tuscaroras that are in North Carolina. And I'm highlighting them because I'm a Tuscaroran. And when we talk about Tuscarora, I did the research. There were two major wars in the 1700s with the Tuscaroras, and we lost. Get that, too bad. But with that, our people were sold into slavery, right? Or they were decimated, right? Or the diseases. And a lot of Native tribes were decimated and they grouped together. And that's one of the reasons that we have the Iroquois Nation today. It was devastated tribes that came together. I could do a whole history on Native things that had happened, but how our tribes came together. But one of the things is, if you look in history today, they will tell you that the Tuscaroras are extinct. But here I am. Here I am. And I can talk to you, my full-blooded relatives in North Carolina on the phone right now that are still in our native land. So there are a lot of misconceptions about who we are. And I ask everyone to do your own research and find out your own past. So these natives were put into slavery or decimated and killed. And I wanted to bring another piece of information when we talk about the census, right? Because there was a paper genocide, and the Native people, we say it happened to us, but it really happened to all of us when we came to America, or America became. And if you look at this census from the 1870s, and I tried to highlight it, you guys, you see there are only three choices: W, B, and M. Now, W is white, which means that all of our relatives that come from Ireland or Scotland or Sweden or France, they couldn't put that down. They had to put the letter W and become white. For those that have African descent or any, you know, the law was one drop, anyone with African descent, they had to put the letter B for Black. And anyone else, mulattoes, natives, Mexican, Asian, had to put the letter M for mulatto. So this is one of the ways that our tribes were taken away from us, and the power of the Native voice was taken because we weren't allowed to vote for our own lands. Let me pull this back in. So that's about the census and how it has actually taken away all of our backgrounds and our cultures. As Rafe said earlier, San Diego County, and I have a slide for Riverside and any county that I go into because it's in every county, this land did belong to someone else. And these are the tribes in San Diego County that this land does belong to. And we all do a land acknowledgement. And I just say how quaint that we're able to sit here, you know, hundreds of years later and acknowledge quietly that this land belongs to someone else. But I want to ask, how many of you want to give up your land right now? We know it's wrong. We know whose land it is. Are we willing to give it back? Another rhetorical question. So another group of peoples, as the land was being taken, right, coming across the land, was the Mexican Americans. So the Mexican was here first, right? And there was a huge war between 1846 and 1848. And there was a treaty at the end of this war, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which happened in 1848. I found this quite interesting. So let's talk about what happened here. Number one, there wasn't that much of America before the Mexican-American War. And when this war happened and the treaty came, that because it's on this slide, I'm going to say this, but then we'll go into a little more. The Mexican people, the king said that he would cede the land only if the people that were in this country already were able to stay and if they would be counted as white. Therefore, they were not allowed to become slaves, and they would be able to be a part of the legal process. So the Treaty of Guadalupe actually stopped Mexican slavery and put them in the class of white. So here's the map I wanted to show. I think this is beautiful. Up top, you see the green, which is supposed to be the free states. We know that there are a couple of states up there that in the beginning had slaves and it was outlawed and all slavery moved down to the south. So now we can say that all the northern states are free. You see the orange states, those are the slave states that were in place. And then if you start going to the left, you start seeing, you know, if you go after that yellow right there, really that's America. But now let's start looking at the gray area and start looking at this Missouri Compromise and the expansion of Spanish territory. Does anybody know, or can you give me an idea of how many states you think we made out of the Mexican territory that we took? How many states did we make out of the territory that we took from Mexico? Yes, ma'am, Joan. I see you think you got it.
We have one guess of 20. I was going to say 6.
26. Okay, let's move on.
I was going to say about 14.
14.
Mhm.
About 10 states. About 9, 10 states were basically made out of Mexican land. If you look here, you can see it was California, Nevada, and parts of or all of Utah, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming. I'm sorry I'm smiling because it just is so much, isn't it? It's just so much. And guess what happened? Guess what happened right after the war, right after we took possession of the land? We found gold, y'all. We found gold. So all of that time from the 1800s through the war, Mexican people have been in all of the territory that I just showed you. And since the 1840s, Mexican people have been deported from their own land. This is showing you that since the 1840s, there's always been an anti-Latino idealism going on in this country. And as the indentured servant moved across the land, they took these lands as their own, thinking that they work for them and they belong to them because it was American soil. And in 1931, just to say, there was a big caper where a Latino area and the people went out to enjoy a festivity, and buses and vans pulled up and just took everybody, put them in the vans and deported most of the people that they grabbed, if they were citizens or not. And I ask you right now, to anyone that's on here, and I really can't see any of you guys, but I ask you, what would you do if we just went to a Juneteenth event, y'all, and a vans pulled up, grabbed us all, threw us all into the vans and took us to a country we didn't know the language, we don't know the people, and dropped us off? That's what some of our people in this country are going through right now. Right now. And it's been happening since the 1800s. So who else came? Who else? There was the migration of the Asian people, right? And a large group came across. They started coming across, and we think for the American dream, right? That's kind of what you get told. Everybody came here for the American dream. But actually, the Asian population migrated here because they were running from the British. The British had started to occupy China. There was a lot of stuff going on, and they were fleeing. And they came here where they hoped that they would have safety. They were able to get work, right? And the gold rush that we just said came from taking the land from Mexico and the railroad. But did we know? I was always amazed by Chinatown, right? Koreatown. And I thought these people had it together. They came over here, created their own cities and their own industries, and they don't need anything from anyone. And I've been jealous for quite a long time. But you know what I found out? That's not how it was supposed to be. It was only because of discrimination that Chinatown even exists. Because when the Chinese came, they were forbidden from owning land, intermarrying with whites, owning homes, getting educations, having jobs. And they had to create their own industry. Therefore, they created their own towns that they could employ each other so that they could survive. And they too went through a lot, right? I mean, there was the Chinese massacre of 1871. Where the Chinese, some boys and men were lynched. And in 1875, our government actually restricted immigration of Chinese women because he felt that the Chinese women were, tempting their men. But actually by 1882, they passed an immigration law that stopped Asian immigration into our country for over 10 years. So the Asian people have also had a hard time in this country. I'm gonna go to my next one. Any discussion?
Ivan had mentioned that he didn't learn this part of our history until he watched the series Warrior on HBO. It was a series created by Bruce Lee.
Watch it. Warriors. It's amazing.
It is. I don't mean to interrupt, but yeah, like, again, this is stuff they didn't teach us in history. They just talked about Chinatown and how it was created, but they never said the reason it was created behind. And this series was written by Bruce Lee way back in the 70s before he passed, and his daughter is the one that brought it to HBO and finally made it a reality. The original Kung Fu, the series that we all know, was what Warrior eventually became, but Kung Fu was basically stolen.
Oh God.
Yeah, Kung Fu was basically stolen and adapted from what became Warrior on HBO. So a lot of interesting history there on its own too. But it's a great series. It's a great series.
Is season 2 coming out? Because I'm waiting for it, truthfully.
Right? Yeah, they announced it a while back ago, but it hasn't. They haven't announced a start date.
Yes. Thank you for that.
No
Excellent.
problem.
Showing you exactly what went on here. Anything else? Before I move on? Okay, let me get going. So white slavery, or the selling of white men. So right here, I just want to talk again about this concept that the landowner, right? Landowners were here. Almost everybody here was a landowner in the beginning before slavery. And these landowners started to get threatened by the indentured servant because they started to cost too much. And just think, sugar is booming. So they need more land, they need more labor, but they want more profit. So they start looking at, well, Portuguese are doing pretty darn good over there with their slave trade and what they're doing. And we are looking for a more cost-effective model. Basically is what they said. And by 1641, they legalized African slavery in our country. And again, it was for what you said, money, profits. Was the reason that they did this. In the beginning, the slaves that were brought here were treated horribly. They died within 5 to 7 years. They were whipped to death, starved. But after a while, the slave owner here realized that there was money, that each life was worth so much more. And the African became called black gold, for the money that you could make off of one slave. And by 1860, over 1 million Africans had come to America, had been, in America. I will have a moment for questions in a second. So look at this map. Has anybody seen the show Enslaved? Enslaved. It's by Samuel Jackson. It's a 5-part series. Watch it. Enslaved. Amazing. And the information that they give about the slave trade and just so much. But I got this slide from there, and I wanted to show this because it shows the migration, or how the slaves, the indentured how the kidnapped African was taken from Africa and moved across the globe. So initially, we know now that Portugal was the first. And if you look, Portugal is, you can't even see me touching my screen, so this is crazy, but Portugal is close to Africa. Let's just say it that way. So the Portuguese started pulling, kidnapping people from Africa. And actually, first they started buying slaves from the tribes, right? If you saw a king woman, that would kind of give you, I'm just gonna do some highlights of all these movies out here right now that are giving up our history, right? In a true fashion. You would know that some of our tribes did sell our people into slavery, the slave system. They were already in slavery in Africa. So they started moving them across. 46% of the slaves went to Brazil. 14% went to South America, Spanish America. 36% went to the Caribbean, which is all sugarcane, right? Sugarcane was all in the Caribbean. And then only 4% of the slaves went to America. Keep that number 4% because it's really going to mean something later. But when you look at these numbers, that's telling us that Brazilian culture, the Caribbean culture, those are African cultures. And we can see how Africa and their cultures have spread across the globe because of this enslavement that happened to them. And we know through history that these people put seeds in their hair and different things that try to carry across the ocean so that they could plant their homeland foods and stuff in other places. And that's why we have some of the African food here today in the South, like yams and other things that came from Africa. I went to, let me stop, go back before we go there. Okay, so I went to Brazil, I told you. I was so excited about what food I was gonna eat, right? I'm in Brazil, what the heck, what do they eat? So the people said, okay, we're gonna give you one of our real basic home style dishes, and it's called fishy squaw, something like that, fishy squaw. And I was like, game ho, I thought it had fish in it, y'all. I was like, okay, I'm getting ready to tear this up. I ordered it. I looked at it, it was a bowl of beans with ham hocks and sausage in it over rice. Beans with ham hocks over rice. Now that's my home day dish. I mean, that's an everyday meal. But because of the African influence we now know that some of our meals that we're eating from are from Africa, right? That's from Africa. Okay, let's move on to this part is really exciting. Wait, I'll stop here and I'll do a questionnaire because I'm going to move into a whole nother phase. So are there any anything that you want to put in a comment box, or Blaine, how do you?
There's nothing in the chat, but I think Connie had a question, right, Connie?
Well, it was more of a statement. I just wanted to say, if we think about what the process, and I had always thought about kind of the West Indies, because you couldn't take an African from Africa and put them on a plantation. Wasn't gonna work. Physically and just mentally, you had to break us down. So you had to take and strip our language. You had to strip us from everything that we knew about our culture pretty much to a certain degree in order to put us on a plantation, because just our physical size, and that's what I've always been taught, is just because of our physical strength and our size is the thing that was threatening, and the reason why they went after the Africans, because the color of our skin and the pigmentation allowed us to be out in the sun longer than the Europeans, because they just couldn't handle it physically. Did you come across any of that in your research?
Yes, yes. And one of my slides did state that the European, that sugar had to be in a very humid, a very hot climate, and that the European just wasn't set up for that. You know, they come from a very cooler climate. So, and Africans were already kind of immune to malaria and other diseases. So, and so, yes, so, and the African climate is very, very similar to our southern climate. So it wasn't like they went from cold to hot. They just went from the same to the same. So they were able to work in that, you know, that atmosphere. Okay.
Hey, Shore.
Uh-huh.
Well, it looks like we've covered a lot of material. In fact, all the material I thought we were going to cover today. Why don't we take a little bit of time to have a more robust discussion with the people here? Open it up a little bit. How does that feel for you?
Yes, sir. There is a halfway point that I'm coming to.
Okay, okay,
we'll be at
great.
real quick so that we do a two-part. I was trying to make sure I could keep it into 2 parts.
Fantastic. All right, thank you.
Coming right up to it though. Okay, so let's go through this one concept, and then the creation of the caste system. And I apologize, Rafe, in the sectioning. The concept of race was created around the 1500s, right? Not before. And the Gangs of New York, has anybody, if you've seen that movie, it's a time for us to understand everybody. The indentured servant has now done their work. They're all just living here now, right? They've got their bit of money. They're looking for their success. They're building, but they came across as Germans, Swedish, French, right? English. They came in their own cultures, and they came here together and they clashed. And that's what the movie Gangs of New York is. One of the things that's talking about is assimilation, because all of those groups as their own, with their own cultures, were not tolerant to each other. And they were all looking and trying to build, what is this America and who is American? And through that movie and through this time, we saw that another thing, the working of race started happening, and we saw things like eugenics and idealism of superiority and inferiority coming into play during this time. So during this gang and some of the street gangs here, we really saw what they had to do, right? So even for the European, the Caucasian, there were very hard times here, even after this, where they called them to each other horrible racial names, right, towards each other. But look at this, because becoming a white America was an assimilation of cultures where people changed their name from O'Brien to Brian. They cut off their accents, right? They changed their religions and they became white America. And that's where I would like to stop it today. And we can go into how the interracians worked with races is what we will be going into in section 2, and some of the stuff that Connie said about how the mentality of the enslaved was broken and different things like that. So for this, we've gone through pre-slavery, why slavery, and who has been impacted up to this point. And I didn't want to leave out the Caucasian person because the European was very impacted as we were, although they don't think it, because now they don't have cultures, right? They're considered white, and they're not considered German or French or English or Spanish. So thank you, Rafe.
There's a number of references put into the chat. If anybody wanted to kind of open up and speak about their reference and kind of allude why they put that in there, can feel free to now.
When you talked about Christopher Columbus, I had always heard also that the Europeans, have you ever heard or made reference, it's called the Caucasus Mountain. Have you ever heard of that? And it was supposed to be where the Europeans were prevented from coming down because they weren't civilized. They were like barbarians, like Vikings. And it wasn't until like Christopher Columbus kind of came around and there was an opening. And then all of a sudden you saw, I think it was like the Shriners that kind of tried to teach them how to be civilized and you know, work within civilization pretty much, because they came from these Caucasus Mountains. And I've only heard some of these things. I've never kind of delved into it to see, you know, what the validity of it was. But I thought it was kind of interesting because if you look at some of the programs that are on now, they're talking about the Vikings and, you know, the barbarians and so on and so forth, to see kind of how they played a role also during that time.
Yes, they were before. But yes, the Caucasoids and the Negroids, and that's one of the ways that eugenics worked on separating the races and ways that they were able to define or give definition and value. And the Caucasoids were up in the Caucasoid Mountains, which was Europe.
Okay,
kind of,
so it really did exist.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That theory exists about through eugenics.
I saw Jennifer put a post in here. I'll just read it verbatim, and then if she wants to, you know, add on to anything there. It says one piece of the situation was the conflicts in Africa that were incited by, at least at minimum, the Portuguese. Keep in mind that the large numbers of humans did not have to be taken from the interior. They were fought for, bought, or captured from individual communities one at a time. And then many were brought to the west coast of the African continent by Europeans and other Africans, and that's where they were picked up by the European slave ships. And the trade began on the coast instead of the deep interior.
Good information. Thank you.
And Joan had mentioned that as African descent, we have a generational stress of racism in America. And I think some of the things that you have presented today kind of alluded to where the stems of that occurred. And Jennifer followed up the etymology of the word slave may have come from Slav, which is a European group, because they were often prisoners of war and slaves in even earlier times, maybe even during early Roman times.
I like that because the history said that the Russians were some of the first sugar plantation slaves. So that does make a lot of sense. I like that. Thank you for that.
Sherilyn just mentioned quickly that through this, it helped her understand the wealth gap a little bit more, which makes a lot of sense too. And then Kelly had asked you, Shore, do you have any book recommendations, reference recommendations where I can read more about the history you brought up in this A+ presentation?
Oh, thank you. Every slide has a reference because so that I'm trying to make sure that we can all gain this information, because we don't have to agree with it, right? We just have to agree that it happened, and then we can disseminate from there if it was good or bad, or But I really suggest, truthfully, doing self-awareness, and that would be researching yourself. I'm so into understanding your own culture because it helps you understand others. So my research would be in you. Research you.
And and Shore made a great part too. I love the fact that there's references on every slide. So I mean, her advice there is fantastic, but also remember that when we send this video out, you'll have every reference that she's put in there and may direct you. Adriana, sorry, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Blaine. I just wanted to say thank you, Shore, for bringing up the basically when you were talking about when Mexico had agreed to become, I guess, America, if those on this land were considered white. And it was just kind of being indigenous, being Mexican American. My mom tells me stories. My mom is extremely light complected. I am not so light. And growing up, her grandmother used to always say, don't say your whole name, just say your name is Patty and you're white. And really her name is Patricia. So it was during those times, it was what my mom would do, I guess, to survive, to not have to deal with so much racial injustice at those times when she was being raised. And so me being raised, being, darker and not having the quote unquote, white woman figure, I had a thicker body. I have huge shoulders from my ancestors, I kind of had to evaluate myself and realize that I had so much culture and history that was like ripped from me. And so I love how you said, to do your own history, which I am now, because I don't want my daughter to feel lost the way I was growing up, not knowing who I was looking at in the mirror. And on purpose, I gave my daughter a very Spanish name. Her name is Catalina, and it's horrible because me and my husband also do not speak Spanish. On purpose, we're like, hey, we brown, so we're going to embrace this. And so her babysitter did not speak English. So, we're just to be much more intentional. And I just appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We had a couple of hands. Aaron, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Blaine. And thank you, Shore, so much. And I just so appreciate this conversation. And I'm so glad that it's happening with everyone here. And I just responded to Joan, your comment about, I just thought I'd throw it out as a great resource about the generational stress of racism, and particularly what Black Americans are feeling in terms of epigenetics and the trauma that can be transformed through our DNA. There's an amazing book the book actually focuses on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, but Deepest Well by Nadine Burke Harris, and it's just really great because she does talk about epigenetics. And I kind of, in the same way that you called for it, Shore, I follow, not to like bring in social media, but I follow a really powerful account. And one of the things that they posted during Black History Month was, if Black people epigenetically inherit trauma from slavery and from our ancestors, what do the descendants of overseers and slave owners inherit? And I just think it's super, it just to me drives home that we all have our work to do in this. And that, if we're really going to be better moving forward, it means acknowledgement and taking ownership and taking real action moving forward. And that starts with the inward look. And so I just wanted to really uplift that and thank you for that call to action individually, because I think this is a great first step or a continuing step for a lot of us who are doing that work.
Thank you, thank you. And part 2 is going to have all of that stuff that you guys didn't see in this one. So we are going into generational poverty and all of that stuff, that we felt that it would be best to break it up into 2 parts. So again, this is before, and then next session will be all about slavery and generational poverty and what that means today. Next person.
Yeah, and before I jump over to Thomasina, she had her hand up next. 2 things. I wanted to remind everybody that we scheduled this one till 11:30 so that this kind of discussion can continue. It's by design, so don't feel like you have to rush anything. And the other thing is, rather than read every single fantastic reference that people are putting in here, I just want to direct everybody that if you're looking for references, they're also going to be listed in the chat, so you can pay attention to that either now or on the review when you watch the video. So that's all I had. Thomasina, you had your hand up next. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Sure. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I think this is great. I think it's really knowledgeable. I have a question as to, will we be seeing any information regarding the role that religion played in the slavery market? And in particularly the Catholic, not to step on anybody's toes or anything, but the great pressure that religion put on people, and especially on African people and people of other countries that the Europeans really imposed their religion in parts of enslaving people. Just want to know, is that going to come up as well?
Excellent question, and I'm sorry to say, really no. There's so many topics, and so many. We could be doing this for a year, right? And we could just pick topics and run through them. In this presentation, what I did talk about as far as religion was how that is actually how it all started, right? In 2 places. Number 1, the religious wars are why the indentured servant came in the first place. And then for religion, it's, Lord, it was how they came here. And it was also, I forgot the point, but I'll bring it back. As soon as I remember, there were 2 points that I did on religion. And I apologize that I can't remember the second one, but religion after slavery and during slavery, and what you're talking about, the monasteries and all of that. I mean, yeah, that's a whole thing. So we can do that. I can do that though. Yeah. Next question, please.
Connie, your hand's up.
Yeah, and this will be the last question because I may have to just jump off around the 11:30. But my thing is our call to action with this valuable information. How or what do you see in terms of how we can either share the information that you're presenting? We do have a newsletter, so some of the information, that we'll do some research, did you know, kind of type of things. But I think that the information is so important and so valuable that, and it's all you've done, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So if you can let us know how we can help you disseminate some information, if that's the direction you want to go with the presentation, if we have different platforms that we can help share some of this valuable information, because I would hate for us to have the event today and then, we walk away tomorrow and there's no way for us to kind of share it with family and friends and coworkers and so on and so forth. So I'll drop off, but if there is a way, then, we're on.
Well, I think I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's why we were making sure that this was recorded, not only for the people in this community that weren't able to attend or see it, but also so that we can reference it out and kind of share it with the extended Alliance network and anybody else who's doing some important work or just wants to learn, right? There's no real targeted aim for who this information should go to. I mean, we see the the education battles happening all over the country, we as a group know that everybody should watch this. Everybody should learn this and be able to take it in, regardless of what your focus is or what your beliefs are. So I think in agreement, the design was to kind of make this as universally available as possible. And I kind of expect that, you know, we have 30 participants almost in this one. If we get it out and people start seeing it by the time we have round 2, maybe we can double that. You know, that would be a great thing to see. So I think word of mouth and you know, a concerted, focused effort on dispersing this presentation is just going to serve the greater good.
Also, I'm available, you know, for different discussions in different groups and committees too. This conversation is very needed. I think that the presentation is comprehensive in a way that it helps everyone. We're not pointing fingers, we're just talking about what happened here. So I'm really hoping that this conversation will definitely go beyond this room. Share the presentation, start talking about what you've learned with others, which is the most important. Spread information so that we can start talking about what really happened in a way that's not accusatory, and a way where we don't have to feel defensive, and a way where we can just start talking about it. And I'll say here, did you guys know that Temecula School District is trying to take away AP history? This presentation that I just gave to you is outlawed in Florida and places in Texas. I mean, we really
battles
need
are happening
to,
all over the place.
Yeah.
we really need to send out and you know why they're doing it? Because people don't know this information. That's why. And when this information is given out, then less people will agree that it shouldn't be shared, right? So word of mouth, get it out.
One thing about some of those battles that are going on, especially I know for the Temecula situation, if there's any kind of bright side in any of that negativity, it's the fact that the strongest advocates battling it are the kids.
The students.
You know, the young people are stepping up, saying that this isn't okay. I want to know that, I want to get this information, regardless of belief. You know, so I mean, that's kind of a dim light in that dark situation, but hopefully they just continue to rally and empower themselves. And it also means too, I just kind of allude to that if hypothetically the powers that be have their decision and that material is not available to them, I get the sense that they're going to pursue it anyway. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where there's a little bit of positivity in that. We can see that momentum build. Ivan, I see your hand up.
Thank you. And again, this is a very powerful presentation. I'm part of the DEI committee with UC Riverside Extension. And so it's unfortunate, I guess, that they didn't know about this, and I thought I shared it, but I'll definitely share the video and see if we can have them join for part 2. But my question was, in your presentation, do you cover like the theory or whatever, you know, the concept of white fragility? Because that's something we had discussed prior to the formation of our DEI committee. And that's kind of what started us to, hey, we should have our own DEI committee at Extension. Is that something, a topic covered?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, it is. It's a topic that's going to be covered. But when we're talking white fragility, I mean, when I do this presentation for school districts, so when I do it for educators, and I haven't been in more hostile situations than I have dealing with our educators with these topics. I have to tell you, white frigidity, they don't want to hear it. So what we have, you know, the thing that what we kind of understand is that just getting it out, the fact that you don't have to agree with it, you can try to do la through it, but if the information is out there and people are starting to talk, it is going to move around. The fragility of it, that's why I have the breathing at the beginning of my presentation, because a lot of times I find that a lot of Caucasian people wear a weight of slavery. This question that's in here, what do descendants of overseers and slave owners inherit? One of the things that they inherit is this weight of guilt right? This weight of what my people did, and they don't want to see it. So at the end of my presentation, what we really talk about is all of us. It's all of us. This didn't just happen to one group. It happened to everybody here, and we're all impacted. As one of the ladies said, and one of the, Aaron's talking about one of them was talking about the ACEs. The ACEs, all of us have ACEs. So when we're talking about really at a molecular level, what has happened here, it really has happened to us all. We're all dealing with it in different ways. And the problem is that there's not a standardized solution. So what I say is that this information needs to be broken into curriculum and used in ethnic studies so that we have a standardized understanding of our history, so that it isn't so impassioned, right? It's not my story, it's not her story, and we're not standing up there going, my people did. It's an information of what happened across the board so that we can all get our brains around it. And what I see with ethnic studies right now is it's very independent, right? This school is doing this. Even within the district, it's very broken up. One school does this and one school's doing this. And so our message is not getting across, even though ethnic studies is supposed to be our vehicle. It is polluted right now, and it's not going to serve us until we, again, I'll say it and I'll shut up with the same thing, have a baseline understanding that doesn't horrify all of us, that we can use to start building this understanding. I do this, I'm doing this presentation for some alternative youth that are, they've been put out of school for this, that, and the other, ACEs. They've got ACEs, they have trauma, and they're now in a situation, and I'm talking to them about this stuff, and it's eye-opening to them. They're literally becoming empowered. And another thing that it does is it helps with race relations, because now they can see that other people have dealt with it. It's not just a Black plight that has gone on in this world. We can see that the Hispanic has gone through, they're getting deported. You mean they were lynched too? That's what I get, right? You mean others had to? This empathetic information has to go out so that we can all build. And at the core of what I do is I increase emotional intelligence, right? Self-awareness, self-motivation, self-regulation, empathy, and social skills. And that's what this presentation is about. First, your self-awareness of what the heck, right? Your motivation to look further and to go deeper. Your empathy that you're now building for others, now that you're gaining this information. How we can begin to regulate our thoughts based on this new information, and how we can act differently in society towards others now that we know it. It's increasing your emotional intelligence, and it's trying to build a better, stronger, safer world.
I'd like to jump in, Shore, and just remind people in the beginning when I introduced you, I mentioned that you provide trauma-informed coaching and training. So everybody, I dropped some information into the chat about how you can contact Shore directly, and a link to the organization that she founded over a decade ago, Community Now. So I hope that you can have one-on-one conversations with Shore today and beyond today and beyond our next webinar in this series. But please, please, please use Shore as a resource. She's a fabulous resource, and she does this for a living, and that's part of why she's here. I want to touch on something Blaine said, the powers that be. I like to think that we're the powers that be, and I hope we can all think of ourselves like that as a collective here, that we're a power to reckon with. We're the powers that be, and we can be the change that we think is needed. So thank you.
Good point. Maybe I should have said decision makers. There were two other quotes or two other comments that got thrown in. Dana said, you consider learning about the neuro decolonization by Dr. Michael Yellowbird and transforming our own brains. We're all steeped in colonization. So another important reference. Erin threw in one of the ways that she talks to other white people about this is that slavery isn't their fault, but they do have a responsibility to be part of the meaningful amends that need to be made given the privileges they've inherited, layered on generation after generation. And then kind of speaking about ethnic studies and slavery, I threw in that from our perspective, everybody always looks at their own history, right? American history, Black history, and all of that. But ethnic studies and slavery and all of these topics, we quickly see in a quick 90-minute presentation full of information that it's a global subject. It's a global topic. So when somebody in Florida is saying we shouldn't learn this in this school, they're not saying, oh, we shouldn't listen to a biased account of American history. They're saying that we should just kind of dash world history altogether. And so it gets very, very skewed. And it's a lot of very ignorant perspectives. Oh, thanks for the link there, Dr. Turkey, for the white fragility link. Adriana asked, is there an interpreter available? I'd love to share this to our Spanish-speaking communities. I know a few organizations that would love to share this out to Latinx communities. Does the closed captioning aspect translate it? Does anybody know? I don't know. Okay, we'd have to find out another way to go about that, but it's a good request.
Yeah, it's something I think we should look into. So thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you. Or gracias.
De nada.
I think I've read all the quotes that are up there. So anybody else has anything they'd like to add? Oh, Erin, go ahead.
Thanks, Blaine. Yeah, I was just going to say, I was typing in the chat and I was like, I should just raise my hand and say this. I know we have a lot of folks here who I don't think are normally part of the Racial Justice Committee, but one of the things that we have been promoting prior to this webinar was the webinar around critical race theory. And this kind of touches on what's happening in Temecula, but it just feels critically important at this point to really protect the storytelling and perspectives of people who are not white. And that's what critical race theory is, whether it's in whatever the topic, sociology, history, math, math and sciences. And so just wanted to, maybe we can, Dr. Turkey, I was wondering, or Marilyn, maybe we can share out the webinar to that critical race theory, because that's a great actionable thing too, is to get kind of up to speed on the threat, I would say, against critical race theory and the importance to defend it, and even how we can help defend it.
Yeah, we'll drop that link in the chat. Thank you.
A point that was made about the molecular level of racism. There's a lady, Dr. Victoria Hyan at Cal State Northridge, that has come up with something called the allostatic load that says that Black people or minorities have experienced racism at a molecular level, and that it is in our DNA and it's passed down from person to person, and that it literally increases, wears down our immune systems. So this thing where they're talking about, oh, Black people shouldn't eat pork, right? And Black people, they always get diabetes. Let's start looking at that from the medical stance of a group of people who are experiencing, discrimination on a daily basis. Their bodies are breaking down quicker. And the fact that they have so much stress on their bodies, if something foreign comes along, they're easily susceptible to that disease. What a better way, what a way. I was talking to my doctor and he started to say something. He said, well, African Americans, and I was like, wait, didn't you hear? And he said, oh, we're starting to learn that. So then I said, well, why didn't you tell me that? Why are you going to tell me that my race of people's bodies break down, that we are susceptible, like we are less, when it's actually the experiences that I've had in my life has made my body break down to where I am susceptible. That's two total different mindsets. One is I'm weak, and one is that I'm a survivor, right? I'm strong enough to deal with what's happening to me. This allostatic load that I am continually dealing with every day, though, means that I might have to have a different lifestyle of wellness to deal with all of the stressors that I'm having on my body every day. And that might be what the African-American population needs to look at, rather than, oh, I got to cut out pork, or, something so simplistic.
Yeah, and I think those factors probably, or not probably, definitely apply to people of color of all colors.
Of all colors.
Especially in this country, and especially over the increase of hate over the last 2 decades. So I mean, the target of aim and the aim of hatred is really diversified. Adrina, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
My only question, if it's too personal, you don't have to answer, is, was it a white man doctor? Because personally, they don't listen. I've had to change doctors a couple of times, not just for me, but also for my husband and also for my daughter. And once we get a doctor of color, it's amazing on how I'm like, oh, you heard me, So that was my only question.
Exactly. Yes, and yes, it was. Sorry to say that it was. And one thing that we need to do is not be angry, but educate, right? He didn't, he was starting to know, but these things take time. So my reinforcing that I knew the information would help him think of what he's going to say next time is what I'm hoping, right? So we can't bash each other. We've all been conditioned. I'm still conditioned in ways that I haven't even figured out yet. So we need to do this in love and with patience and understanding, but we need to do it, right? It's not like it needs to be done very, aggressively, but we can still do this with love.
You took the words right out of my mouth, speaking about needing to educate instead of generalize, right? We're gonna say all white doctors feel this way or act this way. No, but taking the time to caringly and nurturingly explain and share this information, whether it's new or old, is definitely an important step that everybody can kind of carry the responsibility of doing.
I do just want to throw it out there that I did communicate. I just was not being heard. I tried.
Exactly.
Oh, no. Yeah. We understood what you were saying. Kelly threw a comment up too. It said, I'm white and it is so difficult to try and educate my own race about what history actually is, not what they want it to be. In most cases, it's just blissful ignorance, and help them understand their indoctrination.
I am in I told this group this, I think last month. I'm in the Oceanside Rotary Club, and we're an older group, probably 60 is the young, we got a couple of younger, but basically 60, 65 is the average age, Caucasian, mostly male. And we're having a few cultural understandings. One thing that we have to think about here is that most of the groups that we go into, when they're talking about diversity, they're actually talking about assimilation. So when you're telling me that I can come to you and I can be who I am, then you're allowing me to bring my religion, my spiritual ideas, my cultural ideals, and my life experience with me. And if I'm doing that and I'm coming to your group, you can't tell me that I can't be it. So what we need to do is yes, Kelly, I agree with you completely. How do we help these people understand, number one, that there is a whole nother culture than the one that they've lived in? This red, white, and blue culture that we think we're in, it's only one group of people that live in that. The rest of us don't, right? I was talking to a person, and I'll hurry up. I was talking to a person, and I said, do you know what I think about when I see a truck come by with flags on it? These people like to put these flags, and this Caucasian person was like, well, I don't know, do you stand and salute? And I told them that I am in fear for my life. When I see vehicles with flags, are they going to throw something at me? Are they going to cuss me out? Are they going to grab me? Because this is what happens in our society. But if our Caucasian friends have never been told about, they hear it in news, but if they have never talked to someone and experienced it through empathy with that person, how are they going to understand So my club and I are there. I'm at point M called the angry Black woman because I will not assimilate. I do not want to pledge to the American flag. It's my personal stand. Colin Kaepernick knelt to the flag and we see what happened to him, right? But I feel that it's our right as Americans, if we have the right to speech, I have the right to decide if I'm going to pledge to the flag or not. And it became a very big concern with Caucasian people. So we have to start separating things. The flag has nothing to do with it. I love the flag. I would have flag clothes and I can't wear them because I can't represent what the flag is right now. You know, people say, well, the flag is something that we're striving for. No, it isn't, because if we go back in history, we will learn that that flag was created for a supreme white society. It was not created for us all. It wasn't. So why are we trying to make the flag something it's not? And why are you trying to make me become aligned with something that gives me fear? That's always been used for fear. Let's think about these things. So if you want me to come to you and you want my diversity, let me be diverse. That's really all.
Well said. Well said. I want to just give everybody a heads up. We're about 5 minutes away from ending, and I want to make sure that we are respectful of everyone's time. At the same time, there were two comments that posted I wanted to read real quick. Erin put up that she was sharing with Adrena earlier. She was in a webinar yesterday and shared data on how the IRS, agency that doesn't even collect racial data, has a racial bias on who gets audited. Blacks tax filers are audited 3 to 5 times more than white filers, even without collecting that info. And she used that as a example, a very powerful example of how deep racist structures go. And Kelly just followed up with that when we were talking about empathy. I think empathy is the key, listening is the key, and the two go hand in hand. But yeah, the structures, you know, it's kind of hard to argue, even if you have blinders on and you're like, oh, no, it's not. It gets really hard to argue when you start looking at data, facts, and how long. We're not talking about a 10-year history or a 20-year history. You're looking at, you know, from the origin. The history goes from the start. So it really does. And it's frustrating. And it's also very, very hard to argue once you get to a certain point.
Here, Blaine, I want to toss in before we run out of time that this conversation will continue next month on April 6th. We're going to be convening again at 10 a.m. for another hour and a half for the second part. I just wanted to toss that in so you can encourage your friends, your organizational peers to register with us so we can continue the conversation a few minutes today, but for another hour and a half on April 6th. So thank you.
Kelly?
Hi, yeah, sure. I was just gonna dovetail off of what Blaine was saying is that one analogy I kind of bring up to people who say, hey, you know, we're all equal now. We're equal under the law. 1964 Civil Rights Act means everybody has equal rights. I said, well, you know, with respect, you fundamentally misunderstand history. If you look at it in like a football analogy, is in white America, you have the white Americans that built the institutions. They staffed the institutions. They wrote the documents. White males did all of that. So for, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of years, for the majority of our history, it has been dictated by white male Americans, and that's just a fact. So essentially, you know, with disenfranchisement, it's been happening for the majority of our history. And if you look at it like a football field, you have white male Americans who are like at the 90-yard line, and you pass these equal protection laws and that sort of thing. You still have a system that has been built with exclusion in mind, exclusion of people in mind, females, Black males, Latino males, females, everybody other than white males, quite frankly. And so you lift these restrictions, let's say, but the system that was built on exclusion is still there, and it's still staffed by people with that mindset. So essentially you're asking you're basically saying in some circumstances, you're basically saying that, okay, well, you know what, all us white males were on the 90-yard line. We're going to start you guys on the 2-yard line or the 1-yard line. Okay, you're all equal. You're all equal. And it's like, okay, well, you're 10 yards from making a touchdown. I'm 90. And it's just, it's constant resistance. And it's, that's how I look at it.
Right.
Well
You-
said, Kelly. I want to be conscious of everybody's time today. Shore, thank you so very much for this extraordinary presentation and the discussion. And we want the discussion to go on. Mary Lynn is going to send out a link to the recording of today's presentation and discussion. It will also be on the Alliance for Regional Solutions website if you look under the Racial Justice Committee. And we're going to reconvene on April 6th at 10 o'clock. And if you have any questions you want to send to us beforehand, you can send those to Mary Lynn and we can get them to Shore. And maybe she can tailor some of what she's doing. But thank you all very much for all the time that you committed today, the thought that you committed, the passion that you committed. And thank you, Shore, very much.
Yes, I echo that. Thank you, everybody, especially for the presentation and the engaging conversation too.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Everyone have a great day.
Stay safe.